Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second session of our third annual flip. We're just going to be starting very soon. Waiting for some more people to roll in. And I guess in the meantime, we just want to open up the space and remind everyone that the session is recorded and it will be for future reference. And additionally, if we just want to let you know that there is closed captioning for the panel. If you require closed captioning, please locate the CC button and it should be at the bottom of your screen. And you can just select it to enable captions. And we will be getting started very, very soon. Cool. All right, so welcome everyone to our virtual panel on Youth Councils to Environmental Action, a conversation with young leaders. We're so thrilled to have you all join us here for this incredible panel that's conducted in partnership with Sustainable Youth Canada and the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity. So before I hand it over to Warda, who's our evening's host, I wanted to introduce ourselves from GreenPAC. So GreenPAC is Canada's only nonpartisan and nonprofit organization that works to inspire, activate, and amplify environmental leadership in politics. Through our programs and events like this one as well, we aim to engage youth interested in environmental politics by offering them training and important resources. We believe that to make meaningful and sustain environmental progress, we need leadership and meaningful collaboration across every sector and every political party. So today we have our mighty team from GreenPAC here, and it's all currently women-led and women-run. If you're running into any kind of technical difficulties, then you can contact the name GreenPAC Michaela. Or if you're experiencing any sort of issues and you're looking for support, for ease, we all have GreenPAC in front of our names, so feel free to direct message any one of us and we'll get back to you shortly. Okay, so this session is actually part of our third annual Future Leaders in Politics Summit. And this year's flip is a little bit different than our previous flips, which used to utilize a full day summit format and would focus a lot on panels and webinars. But this year we're running a deconstructed flip. And this one is really focused on reimagining environmental leadership and reintroducing what it means to be political. So as we all know, young people are inherently political, and especially this happens when you're working in the environmental space. So we really just want to redefine what it means to be political and in a way that is beyond just simply voting or running for office as well. And specifically for today, we're critically exploring the role of youth advisory councils, and we're joined by young council members that are proactively engaged in environmental action. So you can stay till the end to hear more about some more youth council application opportunities as well. And starting with our panel partners, one of our partners is Sustainable Youth Canada. So SYC is a Canadian federally registered nonprofit, and it engages with environmental problems, energy sustainability, and climate justice for young people such as high schoolers, university students, and CEGEP. So SYC is united by a shared vision for sustainability and the values of identity, involvement, with each region of SYC hosting its own youth-led initiatives, while also engaging with local partner organizations to connect its diverse members with other kinds of sustainability-focused opportunities. SYC consists of dedicated young youth who work together to promote things like sociocultural development of communities and towards a more just ecological transition. We're really excited for you to hear more about SYC from their national co-director, Cher, who is also involved in a youth council and will be moderating the discussion for today. So now I'll be handing over our hosting duties to Warda Sheikh, a youth council member of the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity, CCYP, who is our other lovely partner for this session, and she can introduce herself and CCYP's work.
Thank you so much for that, Merha. So my name is Warda. As Merha mentioned, I'm going to be the host for tonight's webinar. A little bit about CCYP. CCYP is an organization that identifies and addresses gaps, preventing all young people that live in Canada from working and living in by living with purpose and prosperity. So CCYP is committed to changing systems, impacting youth's ability to thrive in the workforce. And we do this through collaboration, innovation, and influence. CCYP is helping to expand the role that youth play so that they can become co-creators in the workforce development ecosystem. We also help stakeholders in the youth workforce to network and improve on delivering youth experiences at a very rapid and a very large scale. So it's youth workforce consultancy services. Service offers training, resources, and consultations to help increase youth participation in quality workforce opportunities. Our services include the Youth Engagement Program, aimed at building mutually beneficial partnerships between stakeholders and young professionals, as well as the Black Seed Program, which strives to support Black youth in the workforce by supporting Black-led organizations and service providers. CCYP also hosts its very own youth council, which I am actually a part of as well, which accepts an annual cohort of youth council members to advise and hold the CCY team accountable on youth issues by co-creating solutions. Along with myself, we have another member on the youth council today that's part of the session, Haruka. She's one of our panelists, and you'll hear from her later in the evening. So moving on to tonight's agenda, we will begin with a land acknowledgement, and then we're just going to go into some brief introductions from our featured speakers. They'll tell you about what council they're involved in and what they're most passionate about regarding environmental politics. We will then have our panel discussions for about 45 minutes, where our panelists will engage in a dialogue about the opportunities and barriers they have encountered as youth council members, as well as provide advice they have for aspiring environmental leaders. Following that, there will also be a short Q&A period for the participants to ask any questions they have for our amazing panelists. And by the end of the session, everything will be wrapped up around 7:30 Eastern. You should come out with this session with a lot more knowledge about what youth councils are, the limits and opportunities, and how to get involved in one. So that's the agenda for tonight. And moving on to just a few housekeeping reminders. While our panelists will be answering questions later on, there will be a Q&A session. There is a question and answer box available throughout the session. So if at any point you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. And as mentioned earlier, there is closed captioning available, and it can be turned on by pressing the CC button at the bottom of your screen. So that was it for me. I am going to pass it on to Mirha for the land acknowledgement.
Thank you so much. Just a very quick land acknowledgement from me. I just want to say before we begin, we're offering this land acknowledgement to connect to all the places that we come from and where we are now. So I'm coming from the part of the territory of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe nations, and that is colloquially known as Ottawa. We are all offering this land acknowledgement to recognize people who still live here and encourage us all to try and do our part to advance reconciliation. And I encourage that if you know who has stewarded the land that you're calling in from or where you live from, feel free to look it up, learn about it, and maybe talk about it with other people as well. And if you don't know, you can look up where you come from native-land.ca, which is on the chat now. Thank you. And I'll take it back to Warda from now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the land acknowledgement, Mirha. Now we're gonna have one of our speakers on screen, and they'll be introducing themselves, starting with Haruka.
Thank you, Orda. Hi, everyone. My name is Haruka Aoyama. Today, I am calling in from the Jaboktok, Halifax in the Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territorial Mi'kmaq people. I am a newcomer youth to Nova Scotia, living here for close to 5 years. I am, as the word I mentioned, I am also a member of the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity, but also in the past, I was the youth council member for the Atlantic Council for International Cooperation. Right now, I work as the clean energy strategist at the government of Nova Scotia. So my interest and expertise is climate change, especially the clean energy transition. And yeah, I will just leave it like that, and I will share my experience later on. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, Haruka. Next up, we have Abhay.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's so great to be here. My name is Abe. I'm from Surrey, BC, the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coast Salish peoples. I am a recent graduate from the University of Toronto, literally a month ago, and my grad's in like 2 weeks, which is really exciting. And I run a nonprofit called Break the Divide, where we connect young people from across Canada and the world to talk about issues like climate change and mental health from local community perspectives. I'm also a part of the Environment and Climate Change Canada Youth Council and the United Nations Environmental Program Faith for Earth Youth Council. So I'm really excited to be chatting about all of that today.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, Abhay. Next up, we have Sunshine.
Hi, everybody. I'm Squawquash or Sunshine Lillian. I am from Hamsheen, also known as Lytton. I am a Indigenous youth, Nickelham and Yakima. I'm calling in from London, though. So I'm just tucked away in my little corner of my hostel in the staircase. So if you hear noise, that's probably why. But I am currently the Indigenous Climate and Policy Advisor with Videa, a nonprofit based out of Victoria, BC, co-chair of the Environment Climate Change Youth Council. I'm also a member of the Youth Advisory Group with CC UNESCO. We're super excited to talk. I'll pass it back.
Thank you so much, Sunshine. And now, last but not least, our final panelist, we have Annie.
Hi, everyone. Tanchi, my name is Annie. I'm a Red River Métis woman, currently located on Treaty 1 territory in the homeland of the Red River Métis. I am the chair for the Youth Advisory Council on the Environment for the province of Manitoba. I just recently started a few months ago, so very new in this position. I'm currently a master's student at the University of Winnipeg, researching how Métis knowledge can inform climate change adaptation. So that's one area that really excites me is looking at Indigenous knowledges for climate change, and also more interested in how we can include this in policies as well. So I'm super excited to be here and to be accompanied by other really amazing youth. So I'm very excited to see how this evening is going to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. And now, last but certainly not least, I would like to ask Shira Gruber, the National Co-Director of Sustainable Youth Canada, to introduce herself.
Hi, give me a moment as I share my slides with you rather. So hi, everyone. Warda, can you give me the green light that you can see my slides?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. Happy to be part of this conversation. I am obviously the co-director of Sustainable Youth Canada, one of the hosts of this talk. So what is Sustainable Youth Canada? We mentioned it a little bit before. We're really trying to facilitate a socio-cultural development of society towards a just ecological transition that is youth-led. And we specialize not only, but a lot in science-based participatory action research projects, which I'll elaborate more on later in the presentation. And at the moment, we have 6 branches across Canada. You can see just 2 of our branches. I am from Tiohtià:ke, the land of the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Yeah, so here we see our teams. And who am I? So I'm completing a Master of Science studying greenhouse gas fluxes in wetlands and working to co-design solutions to fertilizer runoff with agricultural workers. My mission really is to find ways to empower communities from the roots up, and that's what we're trying to do at SYC. I'm one of the national directors. I've been named all kinds of cool things with the Starfish Foundation, which is a great foundation that I recommend youth look into if they're interested in this space. I've given a TED Talk, and I am on the Natural Resources Canada Youth Council. I've done a lot of research. My first project was actually in composting and doing waste audits to advocate that there would be composting in my CEGEP, which is sort of like college in Quebec. And we did end up implementing a pilot project, and now it's implemented in the whole school, and it impacts over 10,000 people. So yeah, so I'll talk to you about one of SYC's projects so you can kind of get an idea of some of the stuff we do. This is Project Phoenix. So Project Phoenix is called Project Phoenix Giving Wings to Angel Woods. Angel Woods is a natural green space with an old growth forest and wetlands on the island of Montreal. It has been an unofficial garbage dump for 40 years. So in this project, youth came together to clean up Angel Woods, conduct scientific research, looking at the trash there, looking at the soil for contamination and looking at invasive species, and also climate justice aspects, compile recommendations to communicate to local stakeholders and government, and to basically, in doing so and collecting this evidence, creating hopefully systemic change to preserve and restore this park, especially within the context of this park being potentially part of a new municipal park. So we've collected over 15,000 pounds of trash. We're finishing up our consultations with the city of Beaconsfield in Montreal, and we're going to be publishing a report with findings in September. So that's an example of youth-led research, youth-led work that is working to create systemic change. So on that note, I'll go into the presentations. So I'll give you guys a little bit of a understanding of how it's going to work today for those in the audience. This event will be a roundtable discussion. So please feel free at any time. You can send us questions through the chat. There's a function where you'll be able to send questions, but we'll be answering these questions in a question period. And I'd love to invite all of our roundtable participants to put on their cameras and so I can see your beautiful faces. All right. Thank you so much for being here. I'm extremely grateful to be talking with you. You're all brilliant and remarkable. And so I'd like to start out with a pretty simple question. What motivated you to apply to a youth council? And how does your involvement in your youth council contribute to your future plans? Is there anyone in particular that feels like they want to? Okay, Abe, start us off.
Yeah, I'm happy to get started. It's a wonderful question because I joined both youth councils that I'm a part of, the Environment and Climate Change Canada Youth Council, along with the United Nations Environmental Program, Faith for Earth Youth Council. I know, really short names. I guess youth councils love to do that. I joined them around the same time. It was around, I believe, June of last year of 2022, and I think I applied for both, or perhaps it was earlier. Sunshine can maybe correct me on that. And I remember applying because I saw these opportunities and I thought, I'm really interested in government and I'm really interested in the way that climate action is going in Canada. You know, there have been times when I feel like youth voices aren't represented when it comes to climate action. It often feels like youth voices are only talked about when it comes to elections even, or rarely in elections even. And so I've been doing climate action work. I was in school doing climate action work, but at a political level, at a national political level, I was unsure of what could be done. And so that's when I decided to apply for the Environment and Climate Change Canada Youth Council. And then the process of applying was interesting because there was a nomination from an NGO, and so that actually made it a bit easier in my opinion, because at that point it was a pretty simple ask of a nonprofit that I'd worked with for quite a while, Be the Change Out the Lines. I asked them if they could nominate me, and that was that. It was only months later that the next step came across. And for the United Nations Environmental Program, I'm going to just shorten that to UNEP, Youth Council. It's an interfaith youth council, and it was very unique in that I actually had someone who I've worked with in Germany recommend me for the council. And so by June of last year, I was applying in part because I thought it was a very interesting idea to have young people from different religious communities talking about climate change from their faith perspective. And it was a global council. So that youth council is 20 young people from around the world from different religious groups, like all over the world. And both councils are very interesting. I do have to preface everything that I'm saying today as well with the fact that I'm speaking today on behalf of myself, not on behalf of the government of Canada, not on behalf of any of the specific youth councils. And so the experiences that I talk about, they are really myself. And I think it ties back to why I wanted to be a part of these councils. It's that I get to share my own perspectives and represent the communities that I'm connected to, whether that's my community here in BC, whether that's my community as a young Canadian, as a young climate activist, this community of us around here today, my religious community as a practicing Sikh or a Sikh Canadian. There's so many identities that I have. And I think a big part of being a part of these councils for me has always just been representing the people that I'm connected to.
Thank you so much, Abe. That was beautiful. Is there anyone who feels like they'd like to contribute?
I'd like to jump in here. For me, my initial motivation was very personal one, just to gain experience and get started in a sector. Just because as a newcomer who doesn't have a permanent residency status or Canadian citizenship, I didn't have I couldn't access the federal government's Canada summer job. I think that's what it's called. And also Nova Scotia has the internship program dedicated to youth who wants to get in, gain experience in a green sector. But when I was still a student in 2020, that was still not available for international students who doesn't have those status in Canada. So as much as I was aware how important the internship is during university, I couldn't get any of that, unfortunately. So I was kind of feeling very insecure after I graduated. And I was the first COVID graduates too. So it's kind of double layering of a lot of insecurity. But then I still thought, oh, what can I still do to get into the green sector and gain experience? And that time I started to look at the youth council, and luckily, even as an international student, I could apply for that. So I was like, okay, let's start from there and see where it will take me. And in terms of if that helped me for future plans, which was at that time getting a job in the green sector, yes, it helped after getting experience in through volunteering at youth council, doing things around the climate change and sustainable development goals. I could successfully land into green jobs after 1 year and 6 months of graduation. So yes, it worked for me. So if there are anyone in the audience who are the international students, this is a great way for you to start. Because it's accessible to you.
Yeah, it definitely also takes resiliency, and I think accessibility is a really important theme that you've brought up. Anybody else that feels, why did you apply to your youth council? What does it bring you in your life? And Annie or Sunshine?
Yeah, I can jump in here. This is going to sound very sus, and I know that, but it is my community burning down. So if you're aware of Lytton, the community that burned down after 4 days of constant 50+ heat, going on to 2 years ago now, that's where I'm from. I call it my villain origin story because that's kind of really what pushed me to go into climate policy. I've been a climate activist, I've worked in climate, but I never imagined myself being in the policy part. So that kind of like catapulted that directness of my activism into climate policy. And it's only been a year and a half now that I've been doing this. So, and ECCYC, that's the short name for the ECCC Youth Council, has provided me with so many different opportunities to be in the spaces of like high level policy making, to sit in, learn hands-on. And sorry if the light goes out, I'm in the hallway. But that has really, I've been able to learn and just fully immerse myself into those spaces. And now a year later, I'm a policy advisor with a nonprofit, which is absolutely insane. I'll pass it to you, Annie, if you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. For me, I decided to apply for the Manitoba Youth Advisory Council because I had been away from home for about 7 years. And I really felt the need to come back, and I really miss my community and my family. And so I decided to come back to Manitoba to do my master's program and be at home in my community. And I guess there's this stereotype, and probably to a certain extent it's true, of prairie provinces and our climate action, and felt as though before I kind of felt like I didn't belong in those spaces, or like my voice wasn't heard. And so I really wanted to get involved as much as I could, and also just get a better understanding of what's going on in my own province. Because I think it's really important not to only to hold our government, like our federal government, accountable, but also like our provincial, municipal, even communities accountable for climate action. So that's kind of what motivated me in a way, is just to feel more powerful and to have kind of access to these spaces that and many times feel like I don't belong in. And so I decided to take a risk. And like I said, I've only been in this position for a few months, but so far I've really enjoyed it. And I guess for future, I do want to work in environmental policy in Manitoba. And so obviously it's going to be very beneficial to understand kind of what's going on. And that's one thing that myself and a lot of other council members have realized, is that we don't really know what's going on in our province, even though we're climate activists and really involved in our communities, and we just don't always know what's going on at the provincial level. So yeah, I'm hoping to gain more insight into what goes on.
You for sharing that. And I definitely think, again, there were some themes that I picked up on there in terms of which regions are centered in the climate discussion. And I think that there needs to be work done on inclusion and listening, especially those that are disproportionately impacted, and accountability. I think that, we're highlighting different ways youth can really play a role. And you certainly belong here, and I'm so grateful to have you here. So moving on to the next question. Can you share some of the goals or mandates of your youth council and explain what is your role in your respective councils in terms of achieving these goals? I see Sunshine. There we go.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So I'm currently the 2022-2023 co-chair of ECCYC. My personal goal within our 2-year term is to ensure that Indigenous youth voices are heard within the climate policy spaces, especially within high-level spaces. In this first year, we're not even into it, the full year yet, but in this first 9 or 10 months now, I've had the privilege to attend COP27, where I gave the closing address on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples Organization. Gone to COP15 in Montreal with a bunch of the ECCYC members, which is absolutely insane. Loved that. Also join in on the First Nations and Canada Joint Committee on Climate Action. And the reason I'm in a hostel right now, I'm in London, is I'm actually on my way to Bonn, Germany, to attend SB 58, which is another UNFCCC climate change conference. And so I really am, yes, I'm learning, I'm doing hands-on learning, but just trying to be as loud as I can as a youth, as an Indigenous youth, as a young woman, as someone who has directly felt the effects of climate change and the climate crisis. I want to just very eloquently, politely scream at these people in rooms and being like, we need to do more than just continue sitting here talking, because these effects are changing people's lives in the worst way possible daily. And we, not to lose hope, but we are losing time. And to just push them a little bit more, make them a bit more uncomfortable. As an Indigenous person, those rooms were not made for me. As a young woman, those rooms are not made for me. And if me speaking up, me being loud makes them uncomfortable, I will do that, because they are constantly making me uncomfortable.
Very powerful. And yeah, I do believe that there's something about being youth in the space, obviously Indigenous in the space, that like you're disrupting it by existing. And I admire that a lot about you. So I'll move on to someone else who's feeling inspired to contribute. I might pick on you. So Annie, I'm going to nominate you next.
I feel like it's hard to follow that. That was so well said. Okay, I have to go back to the question here. Goals and mandates. Okay, so and what my role is. So I think I already said I'm the chair, so kind of just help run things. And I work closely with the Climate Secretariat in Manitoba to see kind of what our mandates are and what council members want to achieve. So right now we currently have 2 mandate items. One is focused on kind of bettering the communication between what's going on at the provincial level and with youth. And like, I feel this way, it's very tricky to feel like you have a voice or an influence on government. It feels like this like super like high almighty thing that you can't reach. And so we're really looking at how this can change. And then the second mandate we have is looking at a clean and green economic transition. And so we're just kind of in the works of that, but it's something that a lot of council members have been very interested in. But other than that, like, it's, from my experience so far, it's been quite flexible. Although we have these mandates, we're kind of in control of how we want them to look, how much time and energy we want to spend on them. If there's anything else we kind of want to bring to the table, it's very flexible in that way. Which I didn't know how it was going to work. It was my first experience being on a youth council, and I was too scared that it was going to be very structured and that we were kind of just following this itinerary. But it's very nice that so far it's really in our hands, and people have been very excited about the mandates so far. So yeah, lots of good discussions going on with those. But yeah, that's mostly what our mandates and goals are for this year.
Amazing. Can I ask you a follow-up? Is that okay? What tools do you guys have for co-designing your mandate? Do you give feedback? Of course, whatever you feel you can say. Do you have any examples of how youth are participating in that flexibility?
Yeah, so it's a little bit more complicated for us because the Youth Advisory Council is like a subgroup of the Expert Advisory Council, and their job is really to help implement the Made in Manitoba Climate and Green Plan. So we're almost an extension of the Expert Advisory Council. And I would say they're the ones that are like super flexible with letting us, they're the ones who give us the mandates. And they've been super flexible with how we want to achieve it. So when we got the mandates in our last meeting, we kind of chatted, and I made sure to reach out to everyone to see what their goals and priorities were, just to make sure that like what people want to bring to the table is heard, even if it's not through these mandates, that we'll have other opportunities and avenues to do so. We're still super early in the year. We started in April, so it's quite new. So I can't like fully respond to that question, but that's just what's been happening so far.
No, that's great. Thank you. So Haruka?
Yeah, sure. And as I mentioned, I am Youth Council member of the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity that Order talked about. So I'm not going to repeat the mandate and goals of us, but one of the things that the Order highlighted is Youth Council member brings the insights and ideas based on the lived experience. So for us, there are 12 members in the Youth Council, and everyone has different background and experiences. So one of the role is to bring my lived experience of being a newcomer to Nova Scotia. So I advise the organization through the lens of newcomers and also someone who doesn't have the permanent residency and Canadian citizenship status yet. Because I truly believe that even those newcomers and international students and temporal workers contribute so much to the ecosystem, the employment ecosystem of Canada. So that's the voice I bring. And also I have done quite a lot of advocacy work around how can we include newcomers into green economy to achieve the inclusive economy. So when we talk about how can we create the sustainable and inclusive employment ecosystem, I always bring those perspectives and also highlighting the importance of how we should be thinking about getting the young people ready to be part of green economy because we need more collaborators and people to tackle this biggest issue of climate change. So that's also the lens I bring. In terms of the role, one of my favorite things of being on this youth council is we have something called micro groups, which is the group of 3 or 4 council members who's working on certain projects or tasks. And for me, I belong to the research and policy micro groups. So we sometimes conduct interview projects, and also right now we are collecting information about where the federal government's grants money are going forward to support the youth employment ecosystem. So we actually, not only that we attend meetings and exchange ideas and advice, we actually get to work on the project and actually make an impact for the organization. So that's something that I really enjoy, doing something beyond advising and discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, you brought up also very great topics: intersectionality, inclusivity, the roles that everyone brings to this, you know, especially with new jobs that will be created with the green economy. So I think it's really important to think, how do we integrate newcomers? And your voice is very important. And you also introduced another idea that I think is really interesting, which is that not all youth councils are structured the same, right? Like there's micro groups and there's different goals and there's different, that's a plurality that I think is also perhaps strength. So thank you for sharing. Abe?
Yeah, and to that point about youth councils being structured differently, I've actually seen that a bit in action through the different youth councils I'm a part of. And so for the ECCYC, as Sunshine was talking about, our goal really is to advise on key environmental and climate issues to inform decisions made by the Government of Canada. And so we're largely advising the Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada, but it's not limited to the department. We're meeting with all sorts of people. And you can actually follow that on the Environment and Climate Change Canada website. And that's a bit of a plug, but it's really exciting. And that's one of the big things that I think we're really trying to do as a part of that national council, is getting more young people involved and understanding the role of government in climate action, but also collecting youth perspectives to inform our advice that we're giving. For the UNEP council that I'm a part of, the purpose is a bit different, actually. According to our terms of reference, and what we've been doing really is mobilizing young people to take positive, peaceful climate action for environmental protection and against climate change. And so already, even if you differentiate those two councils, our main goal for the UNEP Youth Council is mobilizing. And so we're actively working with young people and bringing people from our diverse communities into climate action spaces. I'm also part of, I guess, what's a bit of an advisory board for another organization called the Climate Mental Health Network, and they're based in the States. But it's a group of North American advisors, and as a part of a Gen Z advisory board, I'm also like my role there sort of serves in parallel to the scientific advisory board that the Climate Mental Health Network has. And so there, it's also very interesting that as a part of that advisory board, my perspectives and like the perspectives of us as Gen Z youth, that council is much like the scientific advisory council. And so both perspectives are sort of seen as very important in that regard. Where I'm going at with all of this is just that, like, with all these different councils, it's interesting that they're structured different ways, but my personal goal within many of these councils is actually addressing one of the questions that was in the Q&A box about how climate change makes us feel, whether we should be hopeful. And a major area of research and work for me has been the intersections of climate change and mental health, thinking about eco-anxiety, eco-grief, the ways that, especially as young people, we experience the climate crisis emotionally, whether that's the ecological distress of like seeing natural disasters, experiencing them, or like being worried about the future or being connected to places that are changing. Climate change and mental health is a really important topic. And one of my personal goals with all of these councils is to really get that on the agenda and to have emotions inform how we do messaging, decision-making, and action around climate change.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Again, really interesting themes coming up, and it's also nice to see the contrast between everyone's themes. But there are a lot of commonalities. I would say emotions, like what you're talking about, Abe, that kind of pops up in everyone's discussions, and feelings of, grief, but also wanting to bring your community forward. And I would argue resilience in response to that grief. And again, I'll put a small disclaimer. Anything I say is my experience, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the government or my youth council. But I definitely think that I can relate to what you're talking about within my role. And I think an exercise that we've talked about, or that I've talked about in the climate space, is often, because often you'll have these knee-jerk reactions to things you'll hear, especially within policy spaces that are not catered to youth. And you might feel anger, you might feel injustice, but I think an exercise that I've learned within my youth council is to listen to that feeling, that emotion, and understand how it's trying to serve me. Is it telling me that I deserve better? And if so, what can we do about that to frame that in a policy lens and in a constructive way? And another thing that I see youth councils as is kind of relationship building. And it also allows us to relationship build between us. So this is kind of like very synchronous, whatever, you understand, harmony. I'll move on to the next question. This will be targeted more at the youth that are on two different youth councils who are living those experiences and then can help us compare and contrast. So this will be more Abe and Sunshine. So, feel free to jump in. If you have an experience that's on two youth councils, which you do, how are those experiences similar or different? We did answer this question, but I might ask you to be more analytical.
Do you want to rock, paper, scissors?
Sunshine, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so I'm also on the youth advisory group, YAG, with CC UNESCO, the Canadian Commission of UNESCO. And in my kind of role there, I'm in the working group for the UN International Decade of Indigenous Languages. That started actually a year ago now. So I've been in that for about a year now. And that within my spot in YAG, it's definitely more culture-based. I've been in that role now for, I think I'm going into my second term, third year. And I started there with my communications background. So I wasn't like professionally into climate yet. So I went into communications, culture, kind of just, I didn't know what I was doing yet. They let me in there and I was like, cool, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I have no direction. But now that I do have more of a direction, I am working more professionally within climate. In the working group, I bring in my kind of like climate focus, climate lens, because Indigenous languages are very land-based. Globally and also within like so-called Canada. So kind of you can't have that distinction between the two. They're interconnected. And that's kind of what I like to bring to that table. Like, we cannot be talking about language revitalization without talking about climate. So even though that they are two different groups and like very kind of different sectors, I don't know another word to call it, they still kind of, there's that interconnectedness. And maybe that's just like my Indigenous worldview sticking it in there, like we have to talk about every intersection. But I talk a lot with my hands. I am so tired, so that's probably why I'm talking a lot with my hands. But I don't see a big difference. I think the biggest difference between ECCYC and YAG is YAG, there's like 30 plus of us, whereas ECCYC, there's 10 of us. I think that's literally the biggest difference between the two. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, thanks, Sunshine. Like I think that helps me understand like our roles within ECCYC too are interesting because like it's a government agency, and when I think about that compared to my other or government department, ECCC, when I think of that in comparison with my other youth councils, the UN Youth Council is within a UN agency, a UN department, right? Like United Nations Environmental Program, and then a program within that. And the Climate Mental Health Network that I'm a part of, it's a nonprofit. And I think within all three of these, not only are there geographic differences in scale, one is Canadian, one's a global, and one's like a North American one. But I think because of the very like structure of the organizations themselves, there's different levels of possibility of what us as a youth council can do. And so I know within the ECC Youth Council, it's very easy to talk to the department. We work with our secretariat very often and share how we feel quite candidly. And I really appreciate the ability to do that. In the United Nations Environmental Program Youth Council I'm a part of, there are no government, officials that like we're directly talking to. And so that's a bit of a difference because we're largely working together as 20 youth globally. And so instead of it being sort of like vertical in terms of our communication between us and someone in a different department, it's very horizontal in terms of us as young people working and communicating together to build up our own projects. And with the Climate Mental Health Network, because it's a nonprofit, we can really do anything that we want. We apply for grants, we apply for projects, we build projects with the rest of the team. And so I think like being analytical here, I think those are some differences that I think if anyone here is interested in becoming a part of a youth council, those are important to think about because it influences the action that you can take. With a bigger organization or bigger structure, it might be a bit more difficult to like make changes right on your own or lead your own projects. Whereas it might actually be easier in a larger organization as well to influence people directly, to talk to people with influence, with power. But it also depends what those things mean to you. Like I think I enjoy being on the multiple councils because it allows me to do different things that I want to do in different ways. And I think it's important to keep in mind that like there will be organization-based differences, geographic differences of scope, like even the number of members on the youth councils will make a difference in terms of your experience and your impact. And I think what I'm really saying here is that one is not better than the other, but they will suit different needs for yourselves and for the council and the organizations that you're working with themselves too.
Thank you. Haruka and Annie, do you have anything you'd like to contribute before we move on to the next question? Even if it's in terms of barriers, maybe you're not comparing both youth councils, but like barriers unique to you, anything like that?
Sure, I can speak to barriers a little bit, but for me, when it comes to like a participating or applying for youth council, one of the biggest barriers for me is the time commitment. just because I feel like time commitment it's a factor that either exclude some youth from participating or either make youth health and well-being a little bit miserable. It's just because for me at GCCYP, our commitment is 10 hours per month. So it's almost like 2 hours per week, which is very manageable. But I was part of the group in the past that required like a 5 to 6 hours of commitment per week. And as someone who's working full time, or even for students who's studying full time, with usually during the evening, I have family commitments. So it's just unrealistic to ask for a lot of hours. So I feel like if the organization really care about inviting youth to the space, youth doesn't mean that we all have a lot of free time and liberty. It's not the case. So I feel like by changing the time commitment and be considerate about that, I feel like it will open up the door for more youth to come in. Because what I observe right now is usually in the youth council space, I still feel a little bit privileged to be here. It's just because even though I have family commitments, they don't live with me, they're outside the country. So I have a little bit control over time. But I know someone who's really great and have a lot of great ideas, but because that person is working during the evening time, even after the work, full-time work hours, it's just sometimes I feel like we are missing the opportunity and the voice in the space. So those time commitments, and it's something that I really see as a barrier and also missed opportunity. And the other part is, well, in addition to sometimes immigration status, I would say also technology and health as well. So maybe you saw me blinking a lot because my work mostly is very computer based. I work 7 hours and now it's almost close to 8 p.m. In Nova Scotia, and my eyes are just really tired and visions are getting blurred that I was I can't read the text in a chat box that well. So sometimes it's fun to be part of the youth council, and it feels great to contribute something, but health is the most priority. So I feel like creating a space where people can participate with camera off or with standing up, I think creating the space will just allow everyone to stay healthy and avoid the burnout, but still contribute and be part of the group.
Yeah, thank you for that. Annie, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think in terms of like similar to Haruka with barriers to applying, I personally did not have any barriers. I thought the application was quite short, which I really appreciated. It only had like 3 main questions that required a little bit more thought. But that's not to say that I think like that application, many applications in general, could probably be a little bit more accessible. I've seen some applications where you could submit a voice recording instead. So I think like being more flexible with how people might put their names forward for these things would be really great to see in the future. I think also just like acknowledging that not everyone has the same privilege and access to things. And so kind of like just growing up in a rural community, I didn't have the same access to certain services or groups or extracurriculars as someone living in a like bigger urban area like Winnipeg. So I think just also like being mindful of privilege in these applications as well would be, yeah, great to see in the future. And I don't know if other youth councils are doing it. I don't know how it goes on for Manitoba, but I think it's just always something that people should keep in mind.
Really good points. And I don't even have the words to emphasize how I think that's very important, what you've just said, everything that everyone said, but urban-rural divide is not something we often talk about in terms of resources and even in terms of youth councils. Like I think that there is a dynamic there that we need to talk about. So again, speaking on behalf of myself, I'll add a little something to the mix. I'll say in terms we talk about equity, some youth councils are compensated monetarily, others are given opportunities, others are volunteer. So also in terms of, say, financial compensation, I know mine is compensated. We're seen as sort of consultants. And I think that's also like an interesting conversation to be had about equity. And the other thing I'll say with urban rural divide is also on top of that, even if you're compensated or whatnot, people are in different time zones. Often in Northern Territories, you won't have access to internet. So Zoom is also kind of can pose a barrier even for some people. So I think those are interesting challenges you run into in this space. And also the policy space is, Ottawa, it could be quite Ottawa centric. And could be, I think there's an interesting challenge of, especially people who are, say, from rural areas where you're not in a city normally, and then you're thrust into this space where it's fast paced, it's a lot of jargon. So I think that there's work to be done on that front, and that's some barriers that I've seen. I'll move on to the next question, but yeah, I just thought I'd throw in some things in there too. So now that we've discussed really different experiences, we've compared them. Something that comes up a lot that I've even seen a little bit in the questions in the chat from some people is how can we actually ensure that youth councils are not tokenizing youth? So tokenizing meaning kind of having you as like a placeholder and you're really cute, but you're not really doing much. So that you're not tokenizing youth and that they're genuinely valuing and incorporating youth perspectives and contributions. Moreover, have you experienced any tokenization or limitations from your youth council label? So I'll turn that question to you all. Is there anyone who feels inclined to speak? I'll maybe perhaps nominate you if that's okay. Abe, I'll bring you up first.
Yeah, perhaps I can start with a quick story about a time, and this is not with any of the three councils I'm currently a part of. It's something that happened in an international space in the past, and one of the really insidious ways that I think tokenization comes up is with the understanding or the expectation that it's just worth our time as young people to be on a council because of its prestige or because of the quote unquote opportunities that it gives, because of the name, without actually getting anything material in return. And Shira, I think you described really well that like opportunities don't just have to be financial. Compensation doesn't just have to be financial. It can be mentorship. It can be opportunities. But when those things don't happen, and as a young people, you feel like you're not making a difference, that you are just having the opportunity, and that opportunity to be in a space is enough. When you're made to feel that way, that is really deep tokenization. And one way that showed up for me, I think I was in a very international space, and I was invited to be a part of an international working group. I had someone reach out to me from this international working group, and they had been sent my bio by someone else. And my bio says Abe is a Canadian youth climate activist. Like it says the word Canadian 4 times. And I remember her emailing me directly and being like, hi Abe G, we're wondering if you're interested in joining. We'd love to chat with you. We also just wanted to confirm that your place of residence is Canada. Like, are you returning to your home country or completing your studies in Canada? And like, it was something like that. But really what I realized is that she had assumed that I was an international student studying in Canada and that I was going to return to my like home country. And so that's something that like, it took me a while to figure out that was actually tokenization. And essentially what I found out was really that like, okay, so she wanted diversity without being prepared to welcome diversity into her organization. The second thing that I realized was that like, she assumed that I was not Canadian because of my name, because on paper, my name doesn't look, it's not a white name. And so right there, I think I wondered, like that wouldn't have been the response. It wouldn't have been to ask if I was returning to my country of residence after studies, if I had an English sounding name, like I think that's something that I realized. And after getting in touch with the people that nominated me to be a part of this working group, I told them, hey, I don't think it's for me. No, thank you. I was actually pushed quite a bit to like actually still engage with it. They were telling me how prestigious of an opportunity is. They told me that like essentially that I should be grateful to have even been considered. And that's when, again, I realized that like that I think I was in a position that I was in a very privileged position to turn that down. There was a lot of privilege associated with me being able to say, hey, I have other opportunities. I don't need this right now. But if I had really wanted that, or if I really needed it, I might have put up with it to tolerate, like, and tolerated the racism, tolerated the feeling of otherness. And so my point with this entire story is that like tokenization, I think at its very like root is believing that you're not supposed to belong and taking your presence there for granted. I think as young people, we ought to recognize that our value, what we have to offer youth councils and like organizations in general is incredibly valuable. And we shouldn't take that for granted. We shouldn't let other people take that for granted. And even though there are cool opportunities to be in youth councils, I don't think it's ever okay. Or I don't think we should let that be the only thing that's offered to us. There should be so much more that we get for being a part of youth councils.
Yeah, that was, I unfortunately, yeah, being in these spaces can be really exclusionary to begin with. So definitely this is a phenomenon that happens, and you're often astounded at the audacity of people. But thank you so much for sharing that with everyone. And thank you for your vulnerability. Is there anybody else who feels like they'd like to contribute?
I want to jump in because I can echo what Abby just said. I feel like I haven't really felt tokenized being a youth, but it's more intersectional. When I bring in my identity of a newcomer youth, and then sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe that's the tokenization. But the thing is, it's also difficult to identify sometimes. It just because I feel like there are, and just this is same in those like equity and diversity work too, but I feel like there are so many resources and support to actually educate people to be ally, and that's important. But also there's a lack of resources to actually help those who's actually facing or receiving those microaggressions or those maybe tokenization. So it's just because I grew up in Japan where 98% of the people there are from the same ethnic groups. I never had to think about those tokenization and being receiving microaggression or like a tokenization. Those all the words are new to me, and experience itself is new as a newcomer here. And of course, parents never they never been to Canada. They only grew up in Japan, so I didn't have anyone close to me teaching me how to navigate that as well. So the one thing is just sometimes difficult to really understand what kind of situation is the tokenization. So I feel like more resources really like all help or like I don't know resources to also protect those who might face the situation that are as important as educating others to be ally. So I feel like maybe I faced situation that was tokenization, but I just maybe didn't realize that. And other thing I wanted to say is about those youth label. Sometimes I feel like sometimes I self-tokenize myself as a youth. And what I mean by that is it's just because society is telling me that I am a youth. I tend to just look for opportunity that has youth label. And I had a mentor who told me one day that Haruka, you're already qualified enough. You have a lot of experience. You don't need to put yourself in a box of youth. Even if you apply for other board opportunity or other, I don't know, normal opportunity without youth label, she told me that maybe I might have a chance or like I already experienced enough to even contribute in those space where there's no youth label. And that was kind of, shocking. Like, I was shocked because I was putting myself in the box, and it's great to take advantage of opportunity as a youth, but at the same time, that was kind of hindering my growth and also having access to other opportunity because I thought I can only access to youth opportunity. So I would say, don't limit yourself to youth opportunities. You have a lot of experience you can offer.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can pigeonhole yourself, and often like youth are seen as only useful when you enter the workforce, but in reality, we're so much more than that. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I can relate to what you've talked about. So Sunshine or Annie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I could jump in here. I think coming from an Indigenous point of view and also kind of thinking a bit wider than just like youth councils and different like more youth oriented spaces. As an Indigenous person, that's always my first thought when I say yes to an opportunity or a job or a program. It's like, am I being tokenized? And the sucky thing is like that is my first thought. Did I get into this program because they needed an Indigenous person? And that's kind of been instilled in me since a young age. And I think that's a lot of Indigenous youth can relate to that. Am I going to be the only First Nations youth? Am I the only Métis, Inuit? Like, we're so isolated in these spaces because Indigenous in so-called Canada is seen as just one big like concept when we're not. We are tons of different groups and different cultures and different points of views and worldviews that's not always respected. And to, I guess, kind of to get out of that tokenization, different groups, councils, whoever, you need more than just one. You need more than just one First Nations youth, more than one Métis youth, more than one Inuit youth, because a lot of the times you are alone. Luckily, I'm not. There's me and Lydia. We got 2 First Nations, but we do only have First Nations on the council. We are missing perspectives there. And not only that, and this kind of goes with the barriers part too, with rural and urban, those remote, those are all different perspectives when it comes to different Indigenous groups as well. That is often left out. And when you bring in one Indigenous youth, then they're expected to have all those different perspectives, which is so mentally draining. And it's unfair. It's unfair to the youth that you're bringing in. It's unfair to the youth that you're leaving out. And I guess kind of to like just quickly wrap this up, and that might have sounded like an unfinished thought because it was. Grown-ups, if there are any grown-ups here, you need to stop saying that youth are lucky, that we are privileged to be in those rooms. We worked hard to be in those rooms, and I'm tired of hearing our sacrifices not being acknowledged, because it is a sacrifice. We are sacrificing our young youthhood to fight the climate crisis, and that's not being seen enough. Yeah, Annie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that again is so well said, and I can definitely relate to a lot of what you said. And even when I got the phone call that I was appointed as chair of the Manitoba Youth Advisory Council, like definitely felt skeptical at first and worried that it was going to be like a tokenization kind of effort here. I have not felt tokenized yet, but at the same time, like I agree with a lot of what you say. Like there are some other Métis youth on the Manitoba Youth Advisory Council, which I'm very thankful for, because I just feel like it's also a lot of pressure for us when you're the one and only, like if I'm the one and only Métis, like you feel like, you know, like if you think of the Métis Nation, even like we're everywhere, like not everywhere, but you know, our homeland like goes over 3 provinces, 1 territory. And it's just, if it can feel like a lot of pressure that you're the only one representing those voices. And I agree, like it's not fair, and it's not on us to have to kind of bend over backwards to make sure that like all of our voices are heard. So I definitely agree with what you say.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think also, I guess youth councils are a great way of forming relationships, but I think it's important to remind, you know, youth are not a monolith. Within communities, within religions, within identities, there's always plurality. And I think the way that I try to approach this in my work is bringing as many youth in as I can, within opportunities, within the spaces that's possible, and then through these roles, creating more opportunities too. But definitely there's a lot of barriers there, as we spoke earlier. Jurisdiction is one that I run into. But what I will say is iteration, listening is a really good way of combating tokenization when you can be candid and give candid feedback. So yeah, but thank you so much for sharing, for your vulnerability. We'll move on to the next question. So how do you see the role of youth advisory councils evolving in the future? And what changes would you like to see in how they operate? Haruka, do you want to perhaps go ahead?
Sure. This is a big question. I will try to answer. I feel like, well, my vision, the goal is to really, I don't know, through youth council. Right now, we have kind of structured a youth advisory council, and through that, we may try to make changes. But my vision is, with the existing system opportunity we have, I really want to see those network and alliance getting formed and almost becoming like an independent movement starting from there. And in the future, I really want to see more of, self youth-made, youth-led, youth idea organizations that's coming out from each community to make a change. So that's, it's already happening, but I really want to see more of that happening. I want to see more youth kind of having, influence and, influence over policy too, not without necessarily going through those youth council like structures. And I said that I say this because just going back to my previous point of there are also some youth who have great ideas and interested in participating but not in the space yet. It's a missed opportunity, and I don't want that to happen. So I feel like I think, yeah, I'm still thinking, but I just want to find a way for youth to also contribute and have influence over also policy in different creative ways. I would just leave it like that. I don't know how yet, but that's kind of visions. And also I feel like in the future or even now as well, but those technology and environment, social situations and dynamics that we are in is very different. The things are just, rapidly changing. So I feel like not only the generation, but even like a 5 years or like 10 years, youth who lived in those specific 5 or 10 years, they will have very different reality and also experience that will shape the future. So I feel like more than ever, I think it will be more and more important to actually hear youth voice and get, hear their reality and experience. Because just because how quickly the society is evolving, I feel like the society will not be sustainable without even us as becoming a bit the senior youth. I think I can't even catch up with anything without, relying on younger youth to have hear their visions and perspectives. So I hope that makes sense.
Made perfect sense. I'm realizing time is running a bit thin, but I want everyone to say this, it's super important. So I guess, yeah, for the roundtable panelists, if we want to answer some of the questions in the chat. But yeah, Abe, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing, like Haruka said, is the world is changing very fast. The climate crisis is here and it's accelerating. Like, we need to remember that this entire conversation is grounded in this discussion of the reality and the severity of the climate crisis. And so youth councils are going to be more and more important. But in order for them to evolve, what I'd like to see is more autonomy and more power given to youth. That actually helps address the issue of tokenization as well, because if young people have very clear directives, clear mandates, and are given power and access to influence actual policy or organizational policy, or given resources and funds to take action, whatever it is, we can build up projects. I think the biggest thing that's needed is sort of intergenerational mentorship and relationships. And I think that allows us to use youth councils to the best of our abilities, to use the wisdom of older generations and climate action. And like, soon we'll be the older generation. In 10, 20 years, we'll be able to mentor new people on youth councils. And I think that's incredibly exciting, because we get to give people autonomy, power, and let them build the projects and influence the people that they want to and that we want to. Because, like, I mean, youth are the future, obviously, but like, beyond that, there are so many community connections, intersections of perspectives that we all bring. And I think, like, what I really would love to see in the future is a greater recognition of like the diversity of knowledge that we have available, especially within Canada itself. Like, how can we use those diverse knowledge paradigms, diverse knowledge systems to influence the ways that we take climate action? Because we need to be doing different things. We can't be doing the same thing again and again and expect different results. And so over the next 10 years, I really hope that youth councils can channel and use the diversity of knowledge of youth experience to our fullest extent.
I can jump in here because I actually, in my notes, I had something very similar to what Avi said about youth councils need to be more than just advisory. We need to have a seat at the table with power, because again, our age is seen first before our expertise and our knowledge. And that sucks. We're seen for our age first, especially. And I know this is probably like cross-cultural, but like, again, coming from my Indigenous perspective, my knowledge is 10,000 years old. I have so much like generational knowledge that is not respected because it's not westernized. So having seats at the table, having that power to make it like influential change. And also, I guess just lastly, really quickly here, is when young people, they'll be loud and proud to say youth in their title. Because right now, having youth in your title is sometimes a barrier. And, oh, actually, no, this is going to be the last thing. Youth are compensated for their knowledge and expertise. Like, barely, equitably, like, all of that, because the same amount for every single person, that doesn't work. Everyone lives differently. Everyone has different accessibilities. And if that's not taken into account, that's not being inclusive. Thank you.
Yeah, you've all said pretty much what I wanted to say as well. But yeah, I just like, with this conversation of like being tokenistic, I really hope that youth councils in the future, like you said, like it's not just, we get our pictures taken and they get to post like, look at our youth council, yay, picture, and then that our voices are not actually heard. And yeah, it's not even that we're just being listened to, it's that like our voices are actually included into policies. And I like what you said as well. And I think a lot about like my mom and my grandparents too. And my mom often says like, like usually it's the parents that teach their kids a lot, but like my kids teach me a lot as well. And I love that like knowledge exchange between generations as well. And even my little nephew's, 5-year-old, like I learned so much from him. And so I think, yeah, like the negativity around like youth and not acknowledging that we do have wisdom and knowledge as well, definitely needs to be changed. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say. Also, oh my gosh, I think I realized too, I meant to say the Manitoba, like the Métis Homelands covers fully 3 provinces. I wasn't trying to exclude Northern BC and Northwestern Ontario. So I've had a long day, so I just wanted to clarify before I get yelled at by someone.
No, don't even worry about it. Listen, we're all just showing up as we are, and it's legit to be tired. It's the end of the day. So I'd like to thank you. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a vision I have. I hope we find the levers of impact. There's often those jurisdictional battles and whatnot, but I hope there will be more harmony between youth councils, what's happening on the ground, and sort of like a cycle where of a more democratic process where we can align what's happening in the youth council to amplify the voices on the ground, which is what we're doing now, but even more so. And I hope that there will be generational programs that will bring people in, that will really revolutionize our worldviews, and that will create systemic change, if I can end on an ambitious note. So thank you so much. And now we can proceed to questions. We have about, I think, 10 minutes or so. And I will just go to the Q&A, and I'll just go down the list and see which ones. So I think some of them we've a little bit answered, but I mean, we can still reiterate on them a little bit. So how do you feel when you hear about global warming? Do you think there's hope for the future?
Don't ever lose hope. I think that's plain and simple. Like, it's easy to be cynical. It's very easy to just go down to doomism, especially within media today. Just our social media and our phones are constantly giving us climate doomism. And I think a big thing is that back in the day, in the 90s, when they first started talking about climate change, that's what they had to do. We need to steer away from that, and because there is a lot of work being done on the grassroots level. There are so many people working towards clean energy and cleaning our oceans and cleaning the environment, but that's not seen because it's on the grassroots level. And how the media is portraying like all this doomism is taking away all that work that they're doing, all the work that we're doing. And I don't know how, but it definitely stems from the patriarchy and colonialism. And Ave, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, Ave, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in real quick. I think the other big thing to think about is like, in thinking about how we should feel about climate change, feel your feels, right? Like, feel how you feel and lean into those emotions, because those emotions can often guide you. Like, if you're feeling anxious, maybe there's an action that you can take that can alleviate with that. And if you're feeling grief, maybe sit with that grief and that sense of loss. And if you're feeling guilty about your own personal emissions, like, maybe you look at your own life, but look at the impact that you can have in community and the systemic issues. What I'm really saying is, like, there's so many different ways that we experience climate change emotionally, and being hopeful is critical. Like, hope is an active choice. Hope is something that we can choose every day, and hope needs to be grounded in action. But beyond action, find ways that you can be supported just with your emotions themselves, right? Like, talk to people about how you feel. And I think when we start validating our emotional response without always having to need action, it allows us to be more powerful when we do want to take action.
Absolutely. Halika?
Yeah, it's kind of mentioned already, but I really struggled with having the hope, and sorry for being a little bit negative, but what helped me keep going and not just burn out and do nothing is actually start taking actions. And I had a mentor who also taught me that the hope comes from actions. So that helped me feel like I hopeful a little bit, but also this is a big question and broad. But sometimes I feel like in order to be hopeful, you have to be also be careful and critical about how we are actually doing actions. In these days, I still see, especially in Nova Scotia, that the transition to climate change is not done in a way that is equitable. So we care so much about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that's great and exciting. But yes, I don't really see that as equitable yet, and this is just my personal opinion. So when it comes to hope, in general, action brings hope. But if you're not feeling hopeful, maybe that's telling you that there's something that you see not working, and there's a space for you to realize that and reflect that voice. So I don't see not being, yeah, hopeful as a bad thing. Maybe that's the opportunity for you to identify the gaps and bring your thoughts, because that's what's needed to actually move forward. Yeah, that's what.
Eloquently said. Annie, any words?
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo what Abby said. Like for me too, I kind of struggle with this because some days I do feel a little bit more cynical and like not hopeful. But I think it's okay to have those feelings and you know the wide range of emotions that come with our generation having to deal with climate change and just normalizing that it's okay to have days when you don't feel hopeful. It's okay to have days when you're feeling super hopeful and like motivated. And I think just normalizing that we don't always feel just one certain way about the climate crisis.
Yeah. And if I can throw my hat in the ring, I think that in everything I do, a lot of what I do is very tangible. Like I like going into the field and, like collecting data and being a scientist. But I think what gives me hope is doing it with joy, doing it in community, approaching it from sort of a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity, even degrowth and even like these topics are often framed within the lens of taking something away, when in reality, you can think about it with an abundance mindset of look at all this opportunity, like, to learn how to fix or to I don't know, mend your clothes or to build something for yourself or to plant something or, there's so much abundance in reality. And especially when we react as a collective, which is what gives me the most hope. It's like, okay, this equipment might be super expensive for me to buy alone, but if we buy it as a collective, we can do it. And I think you see a lot of that, and you see people collaborating, and you see consensus building, and you see action, and you see actually, I will say in my role, I do see government taking this seriously. There is not always consensus on the way to do it, but there's a lot of people working really hard with great intent and with a lot of effort to make these realities be responded to. So I have a lot of hope, and hopefully that also will help you. So yeah, just for the green pack, I want to confirm, are we ending at 30 or 45? Yeah, so we have 3 minutes. I just wanted to confirm because we have a lot of really great questions that I wish we could get to. And honestly, like maybe we can drop in an email. I think I put my email in the presentation if ever these people want to talk some more. I'll try to find a question that, well, I guess I don't want to dive into a question and then not be able to answer it fully. So I guess like panelists, what do you think? Should we like try to do a one-liner answer to question, or should we start wrapping up? Thoughts?
I think one-liner is cool.
Okay, one-liner. Okay, this is going to be heavy. What would be some best practices to ensure equity for deserving groups to be represented in this strategy? And they're talking about it within the context of a city council that's working to reduce community-wide emissions. Go, one-liner. Abe, you go first.
I guess since I offered it, I do have to go first. And it's a big question. I think one-liner is like intentional outreach with the communities, like, and as an individual in this space, thinking of the communities you represent and bringing those to the table because you have the strongest relationships with your own community. Sorry, that was like 3 lines.
That's fine. Sunshine, you're up next.
I completely missed the question, but I will answer with we need to decolonize how we think, write, and view policy.
That was an adequate response, admittedly. Annie?
I'm going to say equitable and fair consultation would be my answer to that.
Okay, Haruka?
And just to add on top of what everybody said, also what's important to meet where they are. So actually going out in the community, meet in a way that they allow you to enter the space is very important.
Yeah, and I'll end it with definitions can be different in different communities. Discuss that prior, reduce jargon. And yeah, I agree, meet people where they are, which might mean going to them and or giving them appropriate accommodations. So on that note, we are at 7:29. So this unfortunately is the end of this really beautiful discussion. I just want to thank you all for being so open and honest and vulnerable. It's not easy to do, but it shows a lot of strength. And it shows a lot of reflection. So I just want to commend you and thank you. And I'll pass it on to GreenPAC to close us off.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Those were some great questions from our participants. And with that, we are going to wrap up the session. Thank you, everyone, these amazing panelists, for providing us with so many insightful discussions on youth advisory councils and youth engagement in politics. And a big thank you to Haruka, Sunshine, Abe, Annie, and Shir for making the time to talk to us tonight. And also, if everyone can give themselves a congratulatory self-pat on the back for the GreenPAC, CCYP, and SYC teams for pulling this event together. Lastly, and most importantly, thank you to all of you for joining us today. And before we end off today, I'm just going to hand it over to Mirha from GreenPAC to talk about some future opportunities and some announcements.
Okay, thank you so much, Warda. And thank you again to all of our participants and our panelists for joining this event as part of GreenPAC's Future Leaders in Politics Summit. So before we end tonight, I have a few more important announcements regarding FLIP and also some future opportunities that you may be interested in. So firstly, we kindly ask all participants to answer a very, very short survey regarding your experience attending this event. It should be linked in the chat already, and we will send out the survey link later on this week, so you can keep an eye out for that. And I just wanted to say that as part of our Deconstructed FLIP 3.0 Summit, GreenPAC is also hosting an in-person event in Ottawa on June 28th. So this will be a workshop on personal branding and effective communications for youth in environmental politics. If you are in the Ottawa area in June and you want to learn how to elevate your impact and your identity as a political youth, I really highly suggest that you attend this one. We'll be inviting young parliamentarians, our PI interns, and a storytelling professional to lead the session. And we also launched the Eventbrite for this event today. So you can go onto the link that should be on the screen, and it will be in the chat as well for you to sign up on. We'll be posting a few more details about this workshop soon on our social media, and you can find that on the screen later on too. Some more things on our socials that you can keep an eye out for. We have this draft joint statement that is based on youth visions of environmental leadership that is from our past letter writing workshop, which was our first FLIP 3.0 event. We aim to publicize the draft soon so that you'll all have a chance to provide your own comments and feedback, and all of this will be incorporated into the statement before we publish it on later in the year. Another announcement for you guys, if you want to learn more tips on getting involved with youth advisory councils, or you want to learn how to find more active councils near you, we are actually preparing a takeaway guide that'll have all of these resources, and we'll be sure to send that out to everyone after the panel is over. And finally, our last and very exciting announcement is that earlier this year, GreenPAC started its very own Youth Advisory Council, and we're recruiting up to 6 new members right now. We're accepting applications until June 18th, and you can click the link in the chat to learn more about GreenPAC's Youth Council and access the application form, as you can see on the screen too. If you're aged about 18 to 35 and you're interested, we would really love to hear from you for this Youth Council. And that should be all for tonight. Thank you again so much for joining and listening in. We really hope you enjoyed learning about youth councils from our amazing, excellent panelists, and hopefully you've been inspired to join one yourself too. So thank you everyone again, and have a good night. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks, GreenPAC. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you to GreenPAC.
Thank you so much. You did amazing. All of you guys